Call the meeting to order. Please rise for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the April 16th, 2024 Post Falls City Council meeting. A day to celebrate. We all got to pay our taxes yesterday, if that's a celebration. Rhiannon, thanks for filling in for Shannon tonight, and please note that all council members are present with the exception of Mr. Walker, who is excused tonight. We do have a couple announcements and 3 proclamations. There will be an Arbor Day celebration held this Saturday, April 20th at Tullamore Park at 9 a.m. The first 100 attendees who visit the educational stations get to take home a free tree. And there's a community recycle day and the fall residential cleanup, which will take place on Saturday, April 27th. And visit the city's website for more details on these events. The first proclamation tonight is Arbor Day 2024. Whereas in 1872, J. Sterling Morton proposed to the Nebraska Board of Agriculture that a special day be set aside for the planting of trees, and a holiday called Arbor Day was first observed with the planting of more than 1 million trees in Nebraska. Arbor Day is now observed throughout the nation and world. Trees can reduce the erosion of our precious topsoil, lowering heating and cooling costs, clean the air, produce oxygen, and provide habitat for wildlife. Trees are a renewable resource, giving us paper, wood for our homes, fuel for our fires, and countless wood products. Trees in our city increase property values and beautify our community. Trees, wherever they are planted, are a source of joy and spiritual renewal. Now therefore I, Ronald G. Jacobson, Mayor of the City of Post Falls, Idaho, do here proclaim April 20th, 2024 as Arbor Day in Post Falls, and urge all citizens to plant and care for trees to gladden the heart and promote the well-being of this and future generations. Second proclamation tonight is Fair Housing Month. Whereas April 2024 marks the 56th anniversary of the passage of Title VIII of the Civil Rights Act of 1968, commonly known as the Federal Fair Housing Act. And whereas the Idaho Human Rights Commission Act has prohibited discrimination in housing since 1969. And whereas equal opportunity for all, regardless of race, color, religion, sex, disability, familial status, or national origin, is a fundamental goal of our nation, state, and city. And equal access to housing is an important component of this goal, as fundamental as the right to equal education and employment, and housing is a critical component of family and community health and stability. And whereas housing choice impacts our children's access to education, our ability to seek and retain employment options, the cultural benefits we enjoy, the extent of our exposure to crime and drugs, and the quality of health care we receive in emergencies, and ongoing education, outreach, and monitoring are keys to raise awareness of fair housing principles, practices, rights, and responsibilities. And only through continued cooperation, commitment, and support of all Idahoans can barriers to fair housing be removed. Now therefore I, Ronald G. Jacobson, Mayor of the City of Post Falls, Idaho, do hereby proclaim April 2024 to be Fair Housing Month in the City of Post Falls. And the last is the World Wish Month. And is someone here to receive this afterwards? Great. Whereas on April 29th, 1980, Department of Public Services officers and members of the community in Phoenix, Arizona came together to grant the wish of Chris Gricius, a 7-year-old boy battling leukemia who wished to be a police officer. Whereas Chris's wish inspired 6 of the people involved to form a foundation that would grant life-changing wishes for our children with critical illnesses. The organization known as Make-A-Wish has since granted more than 520,000 wishes worldwide, operating in every community in the United States and in nearly 50 countries worldwide. Whereas Make-A-Wish Idaho was founded in 1986 and has granted more than 2,000 wishes that deliver hope and joy back to the lives of the children with critical illnesses in Idaho. Whereas research has shown that wishes can improve a child's quality of life, and produce better health outcomes. When a wish is granted, a child replaces fear with confidence, anxiety with hope, and sadness with joy. Now therefore, I, Ronald G. Jacobson, Mayor of the City of Post Falls, Idaho, proclaim the month of April 2024 will be celebrated as World Wish Month in recognition of the anniversary of Chris Grecius' wish that inspired the founding of Make-A-Wish and subsequently Make-A-Wish Idaho and the global wish granting movement. And it's dated April 16th, 2024. Thanks for your efforts in this regard. Anything we can do to improve the life of a child is well worth it, so thank you very much. Are there any amendments to the agenda tonight?
We have none tonight, sir.
Any declarations of conflict, ex parte contacts, or site visits? Would you please present the consent calendar?
Item A is minutes from the April 2nd, 2024 City Council meeting. Item B is payables March 26th through April 8th, 2024. Item C is February cash and investments. Item D is acceptance of property, right-of-way and easement, 4th and Idaho roundabout. Item E is acceptance of property, rights-of-way and easement, Zoros Road, Harvest Avenue, and Fennicus Road. Item F is acceptance of property, rights-of-way and easement, Prairie/Zoros roundabout. Item G is Pinion Park roadway, frontage improvements, construction improvement agreement. And item H is Woodbridge Park concrete contract with 5 Star Concrete.
Any questions on the consent?
I'd move to approve the consent calendar as presented.
Second.
Motion second. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Stigleader.
Aye.
Malloy.
Aye.
Ziegler.
Aye.
Westland.
Aye.
Shove.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Tonight, we do have one public hearing, and Bob will be presenting. It's the Idaho Community Development Block Grant application for Warren Field Park Road frontage improvements, fair housing resolution, and citizen participation plan. We'll open the public hearing.
Mayor and Council, Bob Seal, Community Development Director. So this was a coordinated effort between Community Development, Administration, and Parks Department putting this together. As noted, we had 3 primary pieces that I'll be going over right now. The first one will be covering the grant application, which has required pieces that go along with it for the application purposes, as well as it kind of is spoken to these piece of it within the citizen participation plan. And follow that up with some recommended actions and next steps and where we're going. Warren Field Park is the site of the grant application that we're looking for. As you just take a quick peek at that parking that goes around the field, that is one of the reasons why we are here. Warren Field is a centrally located park, as you can notice, is down just in the downtown area. That is used by the neighborhood and used by different sports for the field during the fall especially. And there's also a playground there, so it kind of serves the regional area as well as the neighborhood. The deficiencies is primarily that there is no ADA accessibility to that site, but there's also no parking and no sidewalks and no standard drainage facilities within it, or any ADA ramps in order to get to the playground or the park area. These are the types of issues that we'll have addressed through the grant funding. As you can see, there are no ADA ramps, parking stalls, ADA parking, or other accessible routes through the park. You can kind of note that right now the parking on the site is often haphazard at best. With the grant application, we would be looking to make the improvements that are indicated in the City Center parking plan as shown here. As they would be implemented, you can see on the north side of the property, or the top of it, is 2nd Avenue, and then on the right is North Idaho Street. We do not anticipate being able to do 1st Avenue at this time, just due to the cost of construction. And the grant is limited to $325,000. which I will cover in the budget section of this. Which here we are, budget. Through Idaho CDBG and the CARES program, there is up to $325,000 that's available for funding for these types of projects at this time. This is a limited time period for this one. In order to get Idaho, to have Idaho and 2nd Street done, we went looking for cash from the city's reserves, and we happen to have $80,000 plus available in a parking fee in lieu fee in lieu of parking account right now that some different developments have paid into in order to reduce the parking that they are providing individually on site, and it goes to help provide parking in other areas throughout the downtown. As a note, we will also be seeking reimbursement for this $80,000 through the urban renewal agency in the downtown district. There will also be some in-kind contributions by city staff. This is a further breakdown of that same budget. If you wanted the details, it was kind of it was provided in your packet, just kind of breaking down those costs further for the curb, gutter, sidewalk, parking, and drainage facilities, ADA ramps that would be provided. Project schedule, if approved, and if the grant is approved, we would begin the design contract, we'll look for that in June of this year, with construction next year, and hopefully get it closed out and completed before the end of next year. The beneficiaries to this project, it is located currently in a low to moderate income neighborhood, which is why it qualifies for ICDBG funding. This park gets approximately 10,000 annual visits, which honestly I was very surprised about. However, with the new program, Placer AI, we were able to find those calculations. And you wouldn't, if you look at those reports, it is the fall when we often see a lot of this happening because of all the sporting events where we get hundreds of people showing up every weekend to come to this location. Others that would benefit, again, the sport participants and attendees, playground users and visitors, and other parks users and visitors. Basically outlining the project benefits, so it would provide those ADA improvements, aids access to the park facilities and activities. The 10,000 visitors per year would benefit from the improvements, and without the CDBG funding, this project would be much less likely to be completed. It would have to come from other general fund sources, most likely, because we don't have any other identified source for that. It's not something that we collect for impact fees for. And typically we rely on development to build out their frontage improvements. We're not anticipating any development going here because it's a city-owned parcel. And what we want to continue to use it as a park. That kind of concludes that portion. Talking specifically about that grant application piece. I'm going to go on to the citizen participation plan, unless you have any questions right
Questions,
now.
Bob, at this time?
I have a quick question.
Go ahead.
I know, to complete the whole project would be outside the scope of the money that's available. But if one of the objectives in putting in the parking is ADA accessibility, I mean, the play structure on the back corner far away from the improvements. So how do we reconcile that?
So there is a pathway that is from that northern side that does lead down from that proposed sidewalk and point of entry. And honestly, we were focusing on 2nd Street because it does get more heavily used during the rest of the week than the 1st Avenue side does, because there's housing across the street and nearby. On the southern side, on the 1st Avenue side, there's less housing immediately adjacent to that side.
More heavily used as in more traffic, or
people
just
are parked on it.
Parking on
People
there?
park on
I
it,
see.
whether they are living in the neighborhood or whether they are visiting the park. That area is often parked on. A limited number, but they're there.
Yeah,
So.
gotcha, okay.
Okay. So, as part of the requirements, the citizen participation plan, this just kind of summarizes those pieces that we were responsible for. The whole plan was included within your packet. The participation plan is providing for and encouraging citizen participation, particularly the low and moderate income persons. We have a minimum of 2 public hearings. Tonight's the first one. The notification would have been in the Coeur d'Alene Press. The second hearing we will provide kind of as a status update as we move along in the process regarding those funded activities. We would have it again in the same type of manner. And it also requires that staff are familiar with any citizen complaint procedures that may come in regarding a project such as this. The next piece that we want to talk about is the fair housing resolution. There were 3 questions when this was brought to you last month. These 3 are being specifically answered. If you do have any other further questions, we can talk about that and see what that is. One of the questions was, what is meant by familial status? To put it short, it is families with children or people with children. And this is how it's defined under the Fair Housing Act. Let you read it for a second, and then I will move on. What is the fair housing assessment, and when did the city last perform one? It's a questionnaire that is basically that would have been filled out by a city staff, the fair housing officer in particular, who is John Manley, the planning manager. It was previously completed. The last time it was completed was in November of 2017. We also did one in I believe 2015 and 2011. And staff is currently updating the answers as we speak. I do believe that those were forwarded to after the agenda was completed. It was not required to be completed prior to this hearing, but I believe that that has been finished. The fair housing resolution is the sample language, or doesn't need to be verbatim. This is not sample language. The exact resolution is to be passed and published. Again, it has been approved by prior councils. Most recently that we could find filed was in June 2011. I do believe it was, I found some other iterations further back, but 2011 was what we could find as an immediate notice. Any questions regarding the citizen participation plan or the resolution? All right. The next steps, staff is requesting council approves the following: the fair housing resolution, the citizen participation plan, and the grant application. My understanding is that could all be done in one fell swoop. If approved, staff will finalize the documents, and we will get this application submitted prior to the May 15th deadline, and then we'll begin the design process this year if it's awarded. Any questions for me?
Questions, Bob, at this point? See none. Thanks, Bob.
Okay.
We're the applicant, so we're the proponent, so I don't think we need to see if the applicant wishes to speak anymore. Is there anyone wishing to speak from the public?
No.
So I don't imagine Bob is going to rebut anything he says, at least I hope not. I will close the public hearing. Council, I'll go to you, but real quick background on Earl Warren Field. City got a pretty good deal on that park. We were living just south of that 35 years ago or more. And Earl Warren, I don't know if he was still alive or just passed away, and he lived just north of the park. And Bob Templin, the late Bob Templin, worked out a deal. I think Earl was still alive because Bob Templin worked out a deal for Earl to donate that property to the city. And so my wife and I were 2 of the many neighbors that went and picked rocks out of the field to make it a field. I mean, it was just an overgrown field at the time, and thanks to the efforts of Bob Templin and the generosity of Earl Warren, it became a ball field. And I was amazed. I met someone there, I don't know, probably 6 years ago for something, and could not believe the number of kids that were playing on that field. And the parking has always been an issue to me, because if I can't help it, I tend to drive by our old residence that we moved away from 24 years ago, just to see how the neighborhood looks, and we go by that field. And I'm just amazed at the number of cars that are parked in what would be considered the park's parking area right now, but there are people that live there, and you see campers, and you see trailers, and you see boats, and they're not just parked there for hours. I mean, they're parked there permanently, overnight for weeks at a time. I would love to see something done with that field to bring it up to city standards, if you will. And if we have an opportunity to take a step to do it, I hopefully will go that way. But I'll turn over to council. But I just want to give you some background on the park, because so far it's been a pretty good price to the city. You wanted to comment?
Well, I think along that same vein, applying for a grant keeps it affordable to us. We have just a gem of a park right down there, so I think it just makes sense to me.
I would move to approve the Idaho Community Development Block Grant application for Warren Field Park Road frontage improvements, fair housing resolution, and citizen participation plan.
Second.
Motion second, further discussion. Roll call,
Malloy.
please.
Aye.
Ziegler.
Aye.
Stigleader.
Aye.
Westland.
Aye.
Schob.
Aye. Motion passes. Thank you. Thanks, Bob. Next item up is unfinished ordinances and resolutions, and we have two. The Water Reclamation Facility Tertiary Treatment Project, amendment to the professional service agreement with JUB. Are you going to go both of these kind of at the same time, or are you going to take them individually?
I am. These are both together in the same presentation. Good evening, Mayor, members of the council, Andrew Arbini, Projects Division Manager. My presentation this evening is two contract amendments related to the tertiary treatment project. Providing a quick summary of my presentation, I'll give an overview of the project. This will look very familiar. Won't spend a lot of time there. Give some description on the amendments tonight, and then I've included a next step slide that really illustrates the information we have today and where we see things going in the short term. And then I provided an opportunity for questions and discussion. So as I mentioned, I won't go through each line item, but to summarize, the work that we are doing as part of the tertiary treatment improvements is to meet the permit requirements set forth in the city's permit. Looking at the project overview and compliance schedule, we are currently in the red dashed box, the March 2024. Spoiler alert, construction is not completed, but we've recently extended that project schedule, and I'll talk more about that. I'll also talk on the compliance deadline, which was March 29th. We did not meet that deadline. In a couple slides, I'll circle back and talk about where we are with that currently. 4 years ago, we bid the tertiary treatment project. Kind of hard to believe it's been 4 years. At that time, we made a decision to move forward largely based on the goals that I presented in the previous slide. The project has been impacted by multiple events, a list up on the screen. Majority of those impacts as a result of those items in the list have been presented to council over the last 4 years, most of which with recommendations from staff and paths forward dealing with those issues as a result of the occurrences. On April 2nd, council approved a contract change order with Slutton. This extended the substantial completion to June and the final completion to July. It also retained the existing interim milestones that were identified in the contract documents. As I mentioned, the DEQ deadline was March 29th. Staff has been in contact with DEQ over the last year to 2 years, communicating the challenges in the project, requesting an extension. And we recently submitted formal notice to DEQ that we did not meet the deadline. So I anticipate that we will have additional discussion soon, know more information in the short term. With the extension of the construction schedule, this results in a need to increase 2 of our consultants' contracts. The city is managing 4 different contracts related to this project, the first of which is with JUB Engineers. JUB designed the project, and they are providing the construction management services through the completion of the project. Amendment 9 provides the necessary level of services to complete the project through startup of the systems, construction management and oversight, and then closeout of the project. So that amount is on the screen, the arrow next to it. That's the request this evening. Staff is retaining or planning to retain the existing $85,000 in contingency. When you couch this with JUB's remaining budget on the project, it amounts for about 7% of the remaining budget. So a 7% contingency. The second amendment is with Panhandle Area Council, or PAC. PAC is providing wage compliance services as a result of prevailing wage requirements for this project. Extending their project and providing the level of services through the completion results in that amount in Amendment 3, the 8,600. And then similar approach, we are retaining a contingency, albeit a much smaller amount. So overall financial summary, the increase in the overall project costs, when we look at that compared to the financial strategy and the master planning efforts that staff has put into the facility master plan, it remains in alignment even with the increased costs. As a result, we are not anticipating significant impacts to other city projects. Essentially, we are not canceling other collections projects as a result of the increased construction costs for the Tertiary project. This provides a pretty good summary. It also illustrates the 4 contracts that staff is managing related to the Tertiary project. If you look at the 2 middle columns and comparing those side by side, that results in about a 12% increase in total project costs over the last 4 years, the duration of this project. So next steps, we are working through 2 fairly significant contract changes with the contractor. These are, I would call them typical, just in the sense that they relate to items that were not identified in the contract documents, but are needed for operation of the system. We're working through the nuts and bolts of that and how accounting for what was included and what's an additional cost. I anticipate that we will have a recommendation in the near future that we would be bringing to council to address those items. We also have a construction contingency as part of the contractor's contract that we anticipate utilizing towards those changes. We continue to work towards the project completion. So at the previous council meeting, council approved a change order extending that construction schedule. We met with the contractor this morning to talk through startup and current updates. We are looking at prioritizing the ultraviolet disinfection system and TC or plate settler building, which is the picture of which is on the screen. Both of those systems are anticipated to be operational by mid-May. And I think that is a realistic time frame. Following the startup of those systems, the contractor then would prioritize startup of the membrane filtration, prioritize that work and get it towards startup. And then circling back one final time, we are continuing with discussions with DEQ, and we anticipate having more information in the near future. That is my presentation. I will stand for any questions.
So if we get the first 2 operational by mid-May, and then they turn their attentions to the last piece of that, and I know you mentioned there, but I can't remember, what was the actual expected date of completion at this point?
Substantial completion is June, I believe it was June 21st, and final completion July 21st.
Okay, so if
contract.
things work, we should see the end of this project this summer.
That is our contract completion date, final completion, July 21st.
Okay. What other
The day
questions?
before my birthday.
Well, we'll have a party out there for you. Samantha, go ahead.
What was the original contingency percentage? Don't we usually do 10%? Is that correct?
For JUB,
Or the overall, Samantha?
I guess what I'm curious about is we've had a 12% change in the total contract, but we haven't used all of our contingency yet?
correct. So total project costs, all of the various contracts represent 12%. I did not include the contract or the JUB, PAC, and All West contingency in this chart. This was a carryover from last council meeting, so we included the construction contingency. So what's not included is what would have been authorized initially by council in 2018. So we had a design contract in 2018, and through 9 amendments, we've carried contingencies, utilizing contingencies.
And then adding more?
And adding more.
Okay, okay. Gotcha. All right, thanks.
Anybody else? Any other questions?
I would move to approve the Water Reclamation Facility Tertiary Treatment Project amendment to the professional services agreement with JUB Engineers.
Second.
Motion second. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Malloy.
Aye.
Ziegler.
Aye.
Westland.
Aye.
Shove.
Aye.
Stigleader.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you.
I would further move to approve the Water Reclamation Facility Tertiary Treatment Project contract amendment with Panhandle Area Council.
Second.
Motion second. Further discussion? Roll call, please.
Ziegler.
Aye.
Westland.
Aye.
Shove.
Aye.
Stigleader.
Aye.
Malloy.
Aye.
Motion passes. Thank you. Thanks, Andrew. Next item up tonight is new business, and we have none, followed by citizens' issue. And this section of the agenda is reserved for citizens wishing to address the council regarding city-related issues that are not on the agenda and wishing to speak. Seeing none. Administrative staff reports. First is the 2024 legislative session review. Mr. Wilson and Councilors Stigleader and Westland and I heard about an hour and a half summary of this today.
I'm going
so
to keep it short.
Only that one?
I'm hoping this is quicker.
I'm not doing an hour and a half. You can't pay me enough. And I'm probably not going to cover all the stuff that is in here, but I mostly wanted to give you a quick recap of sort of what we do during a legislative session. And we just wrapped up, thank goodness. I think everybody in the state, including the legislators, are glad that it's over. They've had enough. So I wanted to give you a little bit of an overview of what staff does during the session, how we interact with the legislature, what things we try to accomplish, and then briefly walk through some of the bills. I'm probably not going to touch on all of them. I put them in your packet, so if there's questions about anything, feel free to ask. So generically, we typically meet as staff in the fall and talk about what things do we anticipate coming forward, what types of issues, is there something that we would like to be pushing on? This year there was one that was pretty specific that we wanted to be pushing on, which was the penalties and late charges issue that we've had ongoing with the county. We talk about 8 things that we think that might be coming up that we're hearing through the grapevine. Typically, 1 or 2 of us heads down to Boise for a meeting with AIC that sets up what they're anticipating, so we have as much knowledge as we can going into the session. And then we start monitoring bills, and it typically the first part of January through, well, frankly, most of January, it's pretty slow. You'll see 1 or 2 bills a week that are relevant to us. Normally, this last year, it fell to me. Friday morning, I would get up, come to work, and I would pull up the bills that were introduced, and I'd read the subject matter of the bill, and if it looked like it might relate to the city, then I'd go read the purpose statement. And if the purpose statement makes it look like it is relevant to us, I would put that in an email, copy it out to all of the relevant staff members who can speak knowledgeably about the topics, because I know a lot of stuff, or I know a little bit about a lot of things, but not a lot about any one thing, and so I want to make sure that the right folks are weighing in so that we get a sense of, is this something that's a really big deal? Is it something that we're going to take a stand on, or is it something we're going to just watch and see what happens? By mid-February, there's dozens of bills each week that are relevant that we're sending out emails and asking, is this something we're going to take into account? We were also, the last 2 sessions, we have used a lobbyist in Boise to help us. It's kind of a trip trying to work on legislation when, unlike you all, when you have a public hearing, you notice it 2 weeks in advance and you know what's coming. In the legislature, you might not know there's a public hearing until the night before. And if you're not in Boise, you may not be able to get in front of the legislature and deal with the issues that are coming up. So we've tried the last couple of sessions having someone who is sort of boots on the ground in Boise who can help us out, who is intimate with the process and can give us some guidance as well. Don't sweat this one. This one's going to fall. Because they're talking to the legislature all day. They know what's going on better than we do, sitting hundreds of miles away. So we would typically on Friday afternoon have a recap meeting via Zoom with the legislature, with our legislative aide, and talk through what are we seeing, what's going on. We also, this year, we went down in early January and we did a round of meetings with leadership with many of the legislators trying to work on, specifically on our penalties and interest bill that we're trying to work on, and just making the rounds. And that's an exhaustive process. It's a lot of fun, but it's exhaustive. But so that's typically what we do. We monitor bills. Like I said, weekly, we check in and see what's going on. John sits on the Public Policy Committee with the Chamber, who is also doing legislative stuff, so he's feeding that back into us as we're trying to weigh what we want to weigh in on. If there's something we're going to weigh in on, we typically try to put together a draft letter. We run that past the mayor. If he's okay with it, we send that down. Or alternatively, where they will take remote testimony, and not all committees do, we'll sign up and we'll testify remotely. There could be a scenario where we fly down to testify, but that's really rough given that you often just don't know when the hearing's going to happen, which makes it difficult to book and get down there. So that's kind of what we have done the last couple of years. So I'm going to quickly look at some of these bills. This one doesn't have a huge impact on us. It just changes some licensure requirements. So normally, if we're doing an RFP, you typically, if you're outside the state, you don't have to be licensed in the state until you get the job. They've changed that for architects this year, and with the stated purpose, they want to protect Idaho architects, and so you have to be Idaho licensed before you can even submit for the RFP. The impact to us is it's probably going to nominally increase our costs, because every time you create that little bit of extra administrative burden on the front end before you know if you're going to get the job, they've got to recoup that somehow. And so they're going to add a little bit of a modifier into each one of those jobs to make sure that they're not wasting their time and wasting their licensure. Not a huge issue, but it's going to have a small impact on our jobs. This one actually makes me laugh. Not the subject matter, how it was done. So for the last few years, there's been a push to add ECO communications supervisors to the list of employees who can utilize the Rule of 80 for retirement. That got through the wickets this year, but it did so with some intent language, which was kind of funny because it said, we're doing this one, but we're never doing it again. Essentially said, unless your life is on the line, no one else is going to get to be under this law enforcement exception. So it's kind of funny, like, we're going to let you do it this time, but don't ask again. It's not happening. This one, it will be interesting to see how it plays out. You've probably broadly heard this referred to as the pronoun bill. The impact on the city is relatively small because we don't have some of the other things that are accounted for in the bill. What it does for us is it allows an employee to sue the city if the city disciplines that employee for refusing to call a customer by their preferred title or pronoun, or by refusing to use their name or a derivative of that name, which I don't know that we would do that, but it does create a little bit of an interesting wrinkle if someone says my name is X and you don't want to use X, and that person thinks that you're being rude to them. In theory, we probably want to try to create a pleasant and inviting environment for all of our citizens. So it'll be interesting to see how that one plays out on the broader issues across the state that don't really impact us. This one is a rewrite of a bill that was passed last year that really deals with issues specific to Boise. It was kind of poorly worded, so we're not exactly sure how it's going to play out. We don't have any of these programs where we tell property owners that you have to enter into federal housing programs that would essentially limit your ability to regulate fees or deposits. But the language that they used was a little bit strange. We'll see how it plays out. But the gist of it is that they don't want cities forcing property owners to participate in these federal programs. There's a note there that it's one of several state preemption bills. We see a handful of preemption bills every year. It's kind of a national trend over probably the last 5 to 7 years. There's a number of bills that will come up that try to trim a little bit more away from the local agencies and how much they can do on their own without the state dictating what that answer should look like. And there's a few of those that you'll see as we go through. This one's going to have a little bit of an impact for us on our public works construction. Public works construction involves anytime you do work on a physical facility that's public works construction. Until this year, the exemption was if the job was going to cost more than $50,000, you had to have a public works contractor's license. They raised that to $100,000, sort of reflecting the changing times that we live in. You don't buy as much for 100 today as you did 50 when this thing was probably passed. But normally, what they've done in years past is they've also ratcheted up at the same time the threshold for the lowest type of bidding. Those were both at 50. They kept that at 50 and they raised the exception to 100. And so now we're going to have this kind of a little bit of a weird world where we're going to have people submitting for bids that half of them might be licensed, half of them might not be. So it's going to be a little bit of a wrinkle we'll work through. Another preemption bill. I didn't know any city planning on doing this, but I'm sure somewhere in the country someone was doing it and they wanted to get ahead of it. Let's see. This one I'm not even going to speak to because it doesn't matter to us. We don't have any levies or bonds that are out there. This one's a bit of an interesting one. I don't know what the story is behind it, but it changes the response time for public records requests based on where you live. So if you're in Washington, Oregon, wherever, and you submit a public records request, we can take 21 days to get back to you. If you're in Idaho, 10 days. Not sure why, but there we go. This one, given that we just talked about affordable housing, this was one that was carried by Elaine Price locally. The intent here is to try to provide residents in an established manufactured home park a little more notice so that if they have the chance to try to buy the park so they can hopefully keep the land leases, the prices lower. It gives them a chance to compete. The language that was in the code before this year essentially required the owner to provide 15 days notice from entering into a listing agreement. The problem is most of the sales were happening outside of being listed. And so the notice was never being provided. And so it's a nominal change now that you have to provide the notice within 15 days before entering a purchase agreement to give the residents a chance to try to purchase the property. A good piece of legislation, hopefully it helps. Another preemption essentially prohibits cities from regulating knives outside of police facilities. This is going to have a little bit of an impact for us, but not a ton. It's some changing how they're managing some of their transportation funding grants. There's a pot of money that has been allocated from the state government that essentially 60% was going to ITD, 40% was going to the local governments. Out of the local government pot, that was split 50-50 between large cities and small cities. It's changing who's going to administer those local funds. Instead of coming through ITD, the local funds are going to come through LTAC. And a bigger issue for us as we get closer to that 50,000 threshold is that once you cross that, now you're matching 20% of the grant. So it raised the threshold for a match on the larger cities. I'm going to skip that one because I can't speak knowledgeably about it. It's essentially another way to take someone in if there's an emergency mental health crisis going on. We've seen across the state a number of uncontested elections where there's a council seat that's uncontested. You had continued to have to run that election even though there was one candidate. They've taken that off the books unless you're one of 3 cities in the state. If you're over 100,000, you still have to run the uncontested election. We have seen a number of this type of preemption bill. It essentially prohibits cities and other public agencies from doing business with certain types of organizations who are engaged in a boycott for one reason or another. A few years ago, we had a bill passed that you can't do business with someone who's boycotting Israel. And then we had one that's you can't do business with someone who's an abortion provider or an affiliate of an abortion provider. This year, we've added a whole bunch of folks to that list. We can't do business with anyone boycotting fossil fuel, timber, hydro or nuclear power, agriculture or firearm companies, and those are really broadly defined. So if you're involved in transportation and you transport any of those items, that might fall within the ambit of this. Where it gets interesting for us, sort of as the boots on the ground folks, is if we're doing business with a large international IT company or a national IT company, I have no idea what their affiliates are doing. We have no way of knowing that and really no way of regulating it that. Our approach is we include standard certification language now in all of our agreements that look like that's going to trigger these requirements, essentially requiring that they certify they're not currently and they won't for the life of the agreement boycott any one of these things, or that they're not an affiliate of an abortion provider. It's just another one on the list. Hopefully, we won't see many more of these because this one is so broad-ranging, because it does lead to some weird conversations with a contractor that you're trying to hire. What do you want me to put in this contract? Well, two of the biggest changes that we're going to see this year are relating to annexation of areas and areas of city impact. Those both changed significantly this year, complete rewrites. The annexation laws for us are not as big a change as the areas of city impact change. The annexation bill largely changes how what's called city-initiated annexations happen, where the city initiates the annexation over without unanimous consent of the people who are being annexed. The threshold there has changed from 50% of the owners of that area have to consent, is what the law was. Now it's going to 60% of the owners within the area, representing 50% of the land mass, have to consent before you can initiate that type of annexation. And frankly, that's probably a threshold that you just can't get to. So for cities who have engaged in that practice, they're probably not going to be doing much more of that. For us, the practical change is there was a definition of what's called a residential enclave, where you've got a residential area that's sort of in a pocket that where the city has wrapped around it, and you could annex those folks using what was called category annexation, which is the straightforward, normal process that you're used to seeing, if they were under 100 lots, recognizing sort of the reality that they're completely surrounded by the city and they're using our services. That number has now been reduced to 30, which makes it more difficult for us to be able to deal with those enclave areas. Again, we haven't been doing that. Where it starts to become a problem is when their septic systems start to fail and you're starting to try to provide those services and you don't have unanimous consent to bring them all in at once, even though they probably need to come in. We don't see that a ton, so it will have effect at some point in time for us, but not today. I'm going to skip that one. That's not a big deal for us, more or less. This is the area of city impact laws. So this one changes pretty significantly. In the past, you could set areas of city impact did a few things. One is it was areas you were going to grow into. Another thing that is sort of things that impacted you as a city that you weren't necessarily going to grow into. Say you had, if you're in a different part of the state where you use sewer treatment lagoons and your sewer lagoons were outside city limits, you probably want to have a say in how the county regulates that so you can continue to treat your wastewater. Or if your watershed was on a mountain outside your city limits, you might want to have a say in how that land develops to ensure that the water that's coming into your drinking water system isn't polluted. Those concepts have largely gone away, and the area of impact is now just solely about growth. It's not about those other factors in where you're truly having a different type of impact on the city. It's ratcheted back how large your area of impact can be. It sets a maximum of 2 miles from your existing city limits, with a second requirement that it has to be an area that is very likely to be annexed within 5 years. I'm not sure what that test is or how we determine that, but we have a year and a half to figure it out. So we're going to start working on that. For us, another huge change is that you can't have overlapping areas of impact, which we currently do with the cities of Hayden and Rathdrum, and so we're going to have to untangle that. The last big change is that you used to have a built-in process to be able to sit down with the county and negotiate the rules that would be in effect in that impact area, so that you know that any growth that was happening in areas that you were going to grow into would be compatible with your system when you annex it. That process has gone away. There's no longer a requirement for the county to sit down and negotiate with us what those rules will look like. We can ask, but it's entirely at the county's discretion what that looks like. A few that were failed, I wanted to touch on these mostly just to, maybe because I'm feeling a little bit picked on. There was a couple of bills that were sort of aimed at cities in particular that was a little bit strange this year, and I'm not sure what the animus was, but This one aimed to make any allegations of a city officer's wrongdoing would be investigated by the AG, not by the county prosecutor. It didn't apply to highway districts, fire districts, school districts, just cities. A little bit strange. I'm not sure what that the cause was, but that didn't pass, thank goodness. Another one, a growth one, there was a chance, or an attempt to increase what you could collect impact fees for. That failed. You can't share them with recreation districts. This was another one that was sort of aimed at cities. This bill would have prohibited an elected city officer from concurrently serving in the legislature. So this one applied to cities, school districts, and highway districts. Those three wouldn't be able to do both. But if you're a full-time Board of County Commissioner, you can do both. If you're on a fire district, you can do both. Again, it was a little bit of strangeness that we're picking out certain locals and subjecting them to different regulations than the rest of the locals. This one we will see next year. There was an attempt to essentially, I will say, outlaw local regulations of short-term rentals. That fell apart late in the session. It will be coming back. There's a working group working on it over the summer. We'll watch that a little bit. The last one, this one is one I'm sure will be back. This bill would have required all of our agenda items be public hearings, essentially, in not so many words. It would have required public comment before a final decision on each agenda item. You could have some limits on what that looked like, but essentially it would turn every item into a hearing. It failed, but something similar passed for the school districts. So I suspect that we haven't seen the end of this. In the school districts, they have to take public comment prior to acting on any agenda item. It also requires them to create a process to allow anyone to put any item on an agenda. So we will see what that looks like in practice for them, and we'll see what might be our future. So that's kind of what I had. Happy to answer any questions.
Questions, Warren? Thanks, Warren. Good summary. I appreciate staff following up on that throughout the legislative session. It's very helpful. I'll get requests to see if we want to comment, and it's just good information. It's good to know that the people that have the expertise are following that. Next item up is City of Post Falls traffic signal operations.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor, members of the council. Robert Paulus, Assistant City Engineer. Back at your first meeting in March, there was a member of the public who came to you and expressed some concerns about how traffic signals operate in the region. In particular, they had some concerns about US 95. And they were promoting that the local jurisdictions should take over the programming and control of traffic signals from the Idaho Transportation Department. Tonight I wanted to go over with you, since a number of you seem to have some questions about traffic signals, what does the city have for a traffic signal system? How do we coordinate with ITD? And a little bit on how we control and program and operate our traffic signals. So the City of Post Falls has over 500 lane miles of road. Our 500th mile went in sometime between late August and early October of last year. To control and manage that system, we have right now 12 roundabouts, and we own 20 traffic signals. Most of our traffic signals are located east-west along the Celtice Way corridor and along the Mullen Avenue corridor. A couple of other corridors, more on the north-south basis, would be the Pleasant View corridor, Spokane Street, and Greens Ferry Road. Coupled with the city's traffic signals, the Idaho Transportation Department has 19 traffic signals in the City of Post Falls. Most of those are located along the I-90 corridor at the off-ramps of Beck Road, Pleasant View, Spokane Street, and State Highway 41. And then they have traffic signals along the Highway 41 corridor, pretty much at half-mile spacings. This is taking a look at the entire system of both the city's and ITD's traffic signals. The way this is set up, there's 3 particular corridors in the city where it makes sense to coordinate the signals. A coordinated set of signals is a number of signals which are interconnected, and they share information to try to move traffic through in a more efficient manner. 75% of ITD's signals are on coordinated systems, and 25% of the city's signals are on coordinated systems. Where our signals are coordinated, we happen to be sharing the corridors with ITD, and we have agreements with them on how to coordinate those times and how to manage the ownership and operation of those signals. Taking a look at the corridors in question, the first one is the most recent one as far as agreements that we have with ITD. This is the Highway 41 corridor. Prior to 2019, there were over 5 different MOUs between the city and the state on how to manage the traffic signals along that route. When ITD started widening Highway 41, we narrowed that and combined the agreements we had into 2 agreements, one for Highway 41 north of Mullen Avenue and then one for the I-90 system. Now with I-90 Highway 41 under construction, last June, the city entered into an agreement with ITD, which further brought all those agreements into one agreement to handle that entire corridor. Along Highway 41, ITD takes management and ownership of the traffic signals. They also control how the traffic timing is done on that. From a city staff perspective, we don't have any problems with that. We don't really want to manage ITD's State Highway 41. We don't have any traffic signals that are reasonably close to it either that would benefit from interconnecting with them to get better operations. For the most part, the nearest traffic signals we have are on Greens Ferry Road at Pole Line and Prairie Avenue, which is a mile away. There is one at Cecil and Mullen, which is a half mile, and then Spencer Street at Celtice Way, which is also a half mile. But on 35-mile-per-hour roads, that's almost a minute's worth of time from when you get a green light to when you get to the next traffic signal, and it makes it really tough to get good coordination. The next intersection is the corridor of Spokane Street. This one, the main focus, you can ignore Idaho Street on the far right. I'll talk about that later. But the 7 traffic signals in the center, we've got 4 signals owned by ITD, 3 of them owned by the city of Post Falls. They are all interconnected with a fiber optic network which runs back here to City Hall, and that information is then also shared with the street department. The city of Post Falls took on the management as far as controlling the time for that corridor back in 2019. It's been operating fairly well. As busy as that corridor is, we're pushing about as much traffic as we can through that. ITD does have the right to come to us, ask for changes in the timing, or to ask inquiries about how the levels of service are, or if there's a concern about how far traffic is backing up on and or off ramp. To date, we've had 2 inquiries by ITD in the 5 years we've been managing that system. We're currently in the process of going through and updating all of the signal timing on that corridor, along with all of the other signals that we operate, and that's part of our transportation master plan. Previous to right now, 2014 would have been the last time we coordinated and updated all of our traffic signal timing in the city. And then the third location is out on Pleasant View Road, where we have 2 ITD signals and 3 city signals. The way that one is set up, ITD controls the timing on that corridor. The city of Post Falls has asked ITD 3 times that I can recall to make little tweaks to the timing out there. They've always been compliant with that. They'll run the model, they'll go out there, adjust the timing, and then go back out, take a look and see how things are working, let us know what's going on. I will usually go out there and take another look just to make sure it's working how I was anticipating as well. We haven't really had many issues with ITD when it comes to sharing information or making sure that our shared traffic signals are operating efficiently. Detection and timing for traffic signals in the city of Post Falls. We predominantly use video detection at our traffic signals. In the industry today, the main uses are video or radar. We've tended to stay away from radar. When we first went to video, radar was very new and double the cost. We've liked the results that we get from video identification. One of the benefits is when we are connected to a traffic signal here at the office, if someone calls in and says, hey, this traffic signal's not working, I've sat through 3 signal loops, I can pull it up on my computer, take a look. This is actually a screenshot of Spokane and Mullen Street, which I took last week from my computer. I can see the cars, I can make out the difference between a truck versus a Jeep versus a car. But beyond that, and knowing the color, I can't tell a license plate, can't read them, and to do what I need for my job, I really don't care. One of the things, what the videos show is as the car comes into a box that we draw on the screen, we can see that car come in. It'll turn green when it identifies that it's a vehicle, and then I can make sure that the cars are moving through appropriately. The one drawback I have with radar is more accurate in detection. However, if I'm looking at my computer monitor, it can show me that it's detecting. If I don't have a camera to turn on and look at, I don't know if it's a false call or if it's a real call or if it's stuck. So that's one of the reasons I prefer detection with video myself. When we get into the part of timing traffic signals, our staff has the software, and we are able to time traffic signals ourselves. It is a time, it does take quite a bit of time to do. We have to have what are the main geometric features of the roadway, how wide it is, what's the grade, what % trucks are out there, what volume of cars, what is the average speed of cars, how many are making left turns, how many are making right turns, how many are going through, what time of day are we looking at a particular traffic pattern. We can get all that put in, run it through, find out what's the most efficient traffic timing, and then we can go out to the signal, plug that in, run it, and verify to make sure it's working. With the software that we have 4 ITD signals and 3 city signals that I can control from my desk and change the timing at that location. One of the complex things is when you start looking at something like Spokane Street, you start looking at that really crazy picture in the lower right, which just looks like blue and red bars. That's a red bar diagram which a traffic engineer utilizes to look at and see how the cars are coming into that intersection, whether they're arriving on a red band is what they call it, or a red light, or whether they're arriving when it's green. We want the traffic to try to arrive as much on green as possible for efficiency. I just put it up there because that's the hardest thing I ever had to figure out in traffic engineering. It just about gives you a headache looking at it. In terms of at the office, I already mentioned I am able to perform programming and monitor the operations of 7 traffic signals right now. And this is a view of the control panel from my desk. That's showing me how everything is operating at that moment in time on Spokane Street and on Celtice Way. I'm looking at 7 traffic signals. The one in the middle is a blow up. You can see the little blue lights on there. That's telling me that there's a car sitting there waiting for a green light. That's where I mentioned that I can pull up the camera and verify that, yes, there is that call. While I'm looking at this, not only do I see yellow, red, and green, I can also see how all the traffic signals in that whole corridor are operating together. It'll tell me whether or not there's any errors in the system, or whether or not the clocks are off from each other and by how much. It's a very powerful tool that we have. In fact, the program, when we first got it, it had 3 different base times. And then in 2022, we turned on what is called an adaptive function on it, where it let the computer utilize a little bit of artificial intelligence within certain parameters to improve upon the timing pattern that we have. The computer tells me that it's running about 12% more efficient than the base timing pattern. It's one of those items where I think I generally agree with it, but I don't know how it calculates that it's 12% better than the base timing program. That's a quick overview of traffic signals, how we work a little bit with ITD, and what we deal with on a fairly regular basis. Any questions that you may have?
Thanks, Rob. It's good information, and thanks for putting it in terms that I could somewhat understand.
You're welcome.
Any questions or comments, Rob?
Thank you so much for putting that together. So it sounds like the key area relating to the public comment we received is that where we have traffic signals in a corridor, or we have some ITD and some that are ours, they're already coordinated with each other.
That is correct, and we try to work and keep a good working relationship with the traffic operations at ITD. I noticed in yesterday's newspaper, you may have noticed as well, they had in there about the reprogramming of the traffic signals on US 95. That went live back in the middle of March, and you know, the day I found out about it, I drove up and down US 95 about 3 times to verify how well it's working, and then made sure to go that way the next morning to take my daughter to an appointment and see how it's working in the morning as well. The engineers, that programming was a little bit more complicated than the local ITD branch usually handles, so they farmed that out to a local consulting firm, and that happens to be the same local consulting firm that we're utilizing for our transportation master plan and to do our timing. So a lot of the times, if there is a complex timing solution, both the city and, not speaking fully for ITD, but their habit has been to go to a local consultant to help them out with some of the traffic timing patterns as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Rob, appreciate it. I've called Rob on more than one occasion, told him I'm stuck at a light that's gone through 3 cycles and haven't moved, and I'm gonna run the red light if Captain's not there.
Well, now we know he has access to some of that from his desk. See, I didn't know that till tonight.
So I'm just curious if I'm in a hurry, can I call you and just have you clear me through? Just thought I'd ask. They do it on TV, so. Next item up is mayor and council comments, and I don't have any. How about council comments?
I have a question or an item that I'd like to put to council and mayor, which is doing exit interviews. I know that they're talked about it before, but I would put to council if that was something that would be interested in asking staff to do, is to set that as a standard for city staff when they leave our employment, that we do an exit interview in HR with them so that we continue to be a good employer and work with people that are leaving so we can understand what it is that they're leaving for and how we can improve as an employer in the city. So
It makes sense to me. And the more information we have about how employees are feeling about their jobs, I think better decisions that we can make with hiring and stuff in general.
So it's not standard practice now to do exit interviews?
Yeah, it's my understanding it's not standard practice. Field, I don't know if you talked to Janet or not.
Yeah, I haven't spoken to Janet, but from my understanding, it's not a standard practice to do an exit interview.
What would be any cons of doing so? You don't have to answer that today, but.
The only con some of the times would be the employee themselves refusing to do an exit interview. I know they used to do them when I first started here, but I'm not sure why they discontinued doing them, but we can go back to HR, and I'm not sure if that's an item you want brought back to council or just.
If council agrees, could we ask staff to bring that, talk with HR and bring that information back as?
Sure, we can do that.
I think it really just depends on how we word it. I think it is probably best practice, but is not a requirement, because a lot of it will be under the discretion of the terms of how the employee is leaving. I deal with this every week with staff turnover of, like, there's some people that they need to go. And while I think that those comments, depending on the individual, can be beneficial, it's also can create more of an issue than we really want to delve into. So as best practice, probably recommended, but not as a requirement is what I
Well,
would
one of the
add.
other questions I would have is, in certain situations, if we get our insurance carrier, ICRIMP, involved, and, there's an investigation, and we're looking at making sure that we work with ICRIMP to handle things properly, let's say the employee then is terminated, are you going to do an exit interview at that point, or is just someone who leaves voluntarily, I guess?
So likely if we were terminating, we wouldn't do an exit interview, but we can put some of those standards together and bring it back.
Okay, sounds good.
And
Anybody
we
else?
probably wouldn't do seasonal is the other one, because we do go through a number of seasonal folks.
Nothing else? We do not need an executive session
We
tonight?
do not.
Next motion is?
Adjourn.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.